Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
She laughed like she was choking on her wine, like my lack of a mortgage was the funniest damn thing in the room. And everyone else chuckled too, like it was just a joke. It always is until it isn't. See, in our family, game night wasn't about Monopoly or cards or charades. It was a goddamn scoreboard dressed up with finger foods and fake smiles. A tradition soaked in unspoken rivalries, passive jabs, and the kind of laughter that carries more venom than joy. You show up not to win, but to prove you're not the one who's losing in life, in love, in status. Every year, the same beige living room, the same overpriced cheese platter, and the same damn seating chart Aunt Deb pretended was spontaneous, but definitely wasn't. Jared and Lindsay, Golden Boy and Queen Bee, always got the center couch under the window. That was the throne. My mom, Karen, planted herself nearest the snacks so she could comment on what everyone else was eating. Uncle Rick, usually 2 bourbons deep by the time we started, sat where he could half watch the game and half ignore his wife. And then there was me. Eli, 37, unmarried, renting, working contract jobs in a city they all rolled their eyes at. I always got the wobbly chair by the ficus, which smelled like cat piss and resentment. They don't say it out loud, not exactly. But it's there. Every joke, every loaded compliment, every comparison carefully wrapped in that Midwestern phone-ice tone. Eli, how's the freelance thing going? Still hopping around apartments? Don't worry, you'll settle down eventually. Some people bloom late. I smiled through my teeth like I always do, telling myself to just get through it, that none of it matters, that they don't matter. But it does. And they do. Because when you're raised in a family like this, you don't just learn to tie your shoes or say please and thank you. You learn that worth is something measured by deeds done visibly. You can grind for years, save every dollar, pay off debt, and still be treated like the charity case if you don't have granite countertops and a damn mortgage payment. And in this family, being the only one still renting at 37, even if by choice, was like having a scarlet L tattooed on your forehead. The night started the way it always did, and Deb barking orders from the kitchen, Lindsay Instagramming the snack spread like it was a gourmet buffet, Jared bragging about some conference in Chicago he just had to keynote, and me quietly refilling the ice bucket, because at least that made me useful. And then came the game. This year it was trivia, Deb's favorite, because she could show off and humiliate at the same time. She loved knowing the answer before the question was finished, loved watching the rest of us scramble. When someone missed something obvious, she'd laugh with that throaty snort that made her sound like she'd swallowed a duck. It was all part of the show. But the real games were never on the cards. Halfway through the 3rd round, after Jared nailed a question about European capitals and my mom clapped like he'd cured cancer, I got the question. What year did the first iPhone release? I said 2007. Correct. No applause. Just a glance from Deb, and then she smiled, that slow, coiled smile that said she was bored and needed to stir shit up. You know, she said, swirling her wine like it held the truth of the universe. It's funny. Everyone in this room owns their home, except Eli. And then she laughed aloud, obnoxious, sharp. Like it was the best punchline she'd ever delivered. And, just like that, the room shifted. Mom tried to fake laugh, but it landed flat. Jared smirked. Lindsay tilted her head like she felt sorry for me, which somehow felt worse than if she'd joined in. Uncle Rick didn't look up. And me? I sat there, letting the laughter roll over me like a wave I'd been drowning in my whole damn life. I looked down at my water glass, swirling the ice, and said nothing. But something inside clicked. They thought they knew everything. They thought because I didn't show it off, it didn't exist. That I didn't have anything to show off. They didn't know about the emails. Or the inspections. Or the goddamn cashier's check folded neatly in my glove box outside. They didn't know what was coming, and honestly, for the first time in years, that felt kind of beautiful. Because the thing about being laughed at for long enough is, eventually, you learn to let the laughter sit. You let it echo. And then, one day, you drop something so heavy on the table no one makes a sound at all. So I smiled. A real smile this time. Not the practiced, I'm fine smile I always wear around them, but a real one, the kind you can't fake. And Deb must have noticed, because her own grin faltered just a touch, like she could feel something shift, but didn't know what. And me? I just looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Yeah, Deb, it is funny." Then I sipped my water and let the silence hang a little longer than it should have. Sometimes the best moves aren't loud. Sometimes they don't come during your turn. Sometimes the game starts before the cards hit the table. And sometimes you just have to let them laugh until you don't. The moment the words left her mouth, it felt like the air in the room thickened, like somebody had turned up the heat by 10 degrees without warning, and every eye, well, almost every eye, landed on me like I was some kind of charity case they had to pretend not to pity. Deb's laughter was the kind that comes from the gut, but not because something's genuinely funny. It was that cruel, mirthless kind of laugh, the one people used to show they're still on top, still in control, still the queen of a shrinking hill. She leaned back in her chair like she'd just delivered a monologue worth a standing ovation, and the silence that followed was louder than the joke itself. I didn't flinch. I didn't fire back. I didn't crack a smile or blink in that way people do when they're trying not to cry in front of family. I just sat there, calm, anchored by something none of them could see, a quiet little secret that I'd been nursing for months, maybe even years if I was honest with myself. Because the truth was, that comment? It wasn't new. It wasn't original. Hell, I'd heard it at least a dozen times in a dozen different ways at a dozen different family events, just like this one. Only now, something was different. I wasn't who I used to be. Still, I didn't say a word. I just let it hang in the air while I reached for the half-empty glass of water in front of me and took a long, deliberate sip. I felt it cool and clean on my tongue, cutting through the heavy flavor of the room. Across the patio doors, just past the edge of the living room's glow, I could make out the silhouette of Valerie, my realtor, waiting by the walkway like the damn ghost of decisions made in secret. She gave me the smallest nod, like we were in on some joke no one else would ever get. I nodded back, just once, slow and almost imperceptible. The room started to breathe again. Jared coughed into his hand. Lindsay looked down at her phone, probably texting someone about how intense things just got, and my mom muttered something about how it was just a joke. Deb, Jesus, even though she'd laughed along too. Uncle Rick poured another drink and stared into it like the answers might be floating in his glass. That's when I realized something that struck me a little sideways. This wasn't just a rude comment or a dig at my manhood or a petty flex about homeownership. This was a ritual. This was something Deb needed. Something they all needed. Because if I didn't have a house or a wife or a story they could be proud of, then they could keep feeling like the successful ones. I was the reminder that they had done things right, that their choices were validated by someone else's delay, someone else's difference. And maybe some of you watching this know exactly what I mean. Ever been the one in the room who gets laughed at for not keeping up? Like your life is behind schedule just because your timeline doesn't look like theirs? Tell me in the comments. I bet more of you have been in my shoes than in theirs. The room carried on. Lindsay changed the subject to her kitchen renovation, talking about imported tile and some under-counter wine fridge that cost more than my first car. Jared chimed in about his recent promotion, the third this year, as if climbing that corporate ladder was some divine anointing. My mother, bless her, added that she'd seen a nice starter home for sale near where I used to live, just in case Eli ever decides to grow up and settle down. She laughed again, a short, clipped sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. I couldn't tell if she meant it or if it was just muscle memory by now, some inherited cruelty passed down from generations of women who thought love looked like toughening you up with sarcasm. And me? I sat through it. Let them talk. Let them gloat. Let them build their house of glass ceilings and half-truths and performative wealth. Because in less than an hour, all of it was going to shift. What they didn't know, what not a single person in that room had guessed, was that while they'd been talking about backsplash tiles and stock portfolios, I had been doing something far more dangerous. I had been listening. Waiting for this exact moment. Valerie had been helping me for months. After years of saving in silence, of working nights and hoarding paychecks like a dragon guarding its hoard, I finally had enough. And not just for some fixer-upper or condo in a questionable zip code. I went for the house, the one that sat right on the sand, the one with the wraparound porch and the ocean breeze and the sunset view none of them could buy their way into, because it was never listed online. You had to know someone to even get in the door. And I did. And now I owned it. Or at least I would, once that check hit the escrow account by morning. The best part? It was right next door. Deb's side deck overlooked its driveway. Lindsay's precious wine fridge would rattle every time I had guests over. Jared's expensive speakers would pick up the echo of my quiet contentment, whether they liked it or not. I wasn't doing it to brag, though. Not really. This wasn't about showing off. This was about balance. About taking back something they'd chipped away at for years. About proving to myself, not them, that I was never behind. I was just building something they couldn't see. So I smiled again, quieter this time, and said, "Anyone want more wine?" Because nothing rattles a room like kindness from the man they thought was broken. And, just like that, the game moved on. But for me, it had just started. The tension didn't go away after the joke landed. If anything, it thickened like gravy left too long on the stove, congealing into something you couldn't ignore, no matter how hard you tried to stir it back into smoothness. Every voice in the room sounded too loud, every laugh too forced, and every movement had that jittery, self-conscious edge, like everyone had suddenly remembered they were being watched, judged, evaluated against a scoreboard no one ever actually admitted existed. Jared leaned forward to refill his drink like he had something smart to say, but lost the nerve halfway through the motion. Lindsay scrolled through her phone like her screen might save her from the weirdness, and my mother, my own mother, kept glancing at me with that mix of worry and annoyance only she could master, as if she wanted to ask if I was okay but didn't want to risk the answer being complicated. So I stood up. I didn't make a scene. I didn't slam a glass down or throw some clever line over my shoulder. I just rose slowly, smoothed the front of my shirt, and said something like, "Excuse me a moment," which in this family is code for "I need to breathe air that doesn't reek of condescension and Chardonnay." I walked through the living room, through the patio doors, and into the coolness of early evening, like it was holy space. The sky was painted in those deep purples and soft oranges that only exist for a few minutes a day, and the sound of the waves not far off was steady and calming in a way no human voice ever could be. Valerie stood at the bottom of the steps leading from the deck, holding her phone in one hand and a slim, leather folder in the other. She wore a long black coat that moved like ink in water, her blonde hair tied back in a loose knot, and her face, as always, looked like it was carved from granite, unreadable but not unkind. "You're sure you want to do this now?" she asked, voice low, like she was part of the secret before it was even fully spoken. I didn't hesitate. "Now's good." She stepped closer, opened the folder, and held out a single sheet of paper clipped to the inside, a copy of the sale agreement, with all the lines filled, all the boxes checked, and my name printed bold across the top. Below that, the address, clean and simple, 22 Shoreline Drive. One number up from Deb's fortress of petty insults. Same street. Same view. Better bones. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope, thick with certified paper and weight. Inside was a cashier's check for the full asking price, made out to the seller's attorney. No contingencies. No negotiations. No second chances. I handed it over like I was handing her the remote to a bomb. Valerie took it without comment, slipped it into the folder, and snapped it shut. She didn't say congratulations, and I didn't need her to. This wasn't about celebration. This wasn't even about revenge. Not really. This was about quiet power. About doing something on your own terms in a world that keeps trying to define your value by how loud you are about it. "I'll call you in the morning once it clears," she said. I nodded. "Thank you." And for a second, neither of us moved. Just stood there in the dark, surrounded by the distant murmur of my family laughing at God knows what, probably some half-remembered story that made me the punchline. I could hear Deb's voice above the rest, still riding high on whatever power she thought she had left, and it struck me in that moment how small her world actually was. For all her homes and parties and curated appearances, her world ended at her driveway, and her sense of victory depended entirely on having someone beneath her to look down on. What happens when that person moves in next door and builds something taller? I thanked Valerie again, this time more quietly, and turned to go back inside. The moment I opened the sliding door, the warmth of the house hit me again like a wall, not temperature, but atmosphere, that tight, suffocating kind that comes from too many years of unspoken things crammed into one space. Everyone looked up for a second when I stepped back in, then looked away just as fast, like they couldn't figure out why I was smiling to myself. Mom asked if I was okay, but I waved it off. "Just needed some air," I said, and went back to my seat like nothing had happened. The game was still going, technically, but nobody was really paying attention anymore. The vibe had shifted. People could feel something under the surface, even if they didn't know what it was. Like the scent of ozone before a storm or the weird stillness animals sense before an earthquake. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know it had already arrived. Deb tried to restart the energy, tossing out a trivia question about Oscar winners like it was going to save the night, but the punch had gone out of her voice. Her eyes kept flicking toward the windows behind me, like she could feel something out there she couldn't quite name. I sat back in my chair, legs crossed, heart beating steady and calm. The check was out of my hands now. The papers were signed. The wheels had turned. All I had to do was wait. When I came back inside, it was like the whole house had inhaled but never figured out how to let the breath go again, and the air felt tighter than before, like everyone could sense something was off but didn't yet know where to place it. The game, if you could still call it that, limped along in fits and starts, questions asked half-heartedly and answered with distracted muttering, like everyone was waiting for some invisible shoe to drop. The tension was no longer just under the surface. It was in the walls, in the clink of a wine glass, in the way my mother stopped chewing mid-bite and kept glancing at me as if she expected I might explode or disappear or both. It didn't take long. I hadn't even finished settling back into my spot when Lindsay, whose ears were always sharper than anyone gave her credit for, peered through the patio doors and squinted at the driveway just beyond the hedge. "Hey," she said, slow and uncertain. Is that Valerie from West Coast Realty out there?" Her voice rose like she didn't quite trust her own eyes, or maybe she did and just didn't trust what those eyes might mean. Everyone else turned to look, not quickly, not all at once, but with that same cautious energy people get when they see blue lights in their rearview mirror and can't tell if they're about to get pulled over or just passed by. Deb was the first to speak. "Oh, Valerie," she said, drawing out the name like it was something sour caught in her throat. She's my neighbor's agent, I think. I've seen her car at the house next door." The words came out confidently at first, but the last two syllables cracked like dry wood, and I watched her swallow them back down like they'd betrayed her. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Because silence, when you time it right, says more than any speech ever could. The others looked at me slowly, cautiously, and Jared was the one to ask, because he always thought he was brave when really, he was just clueless. "Eli," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't go anywhere, "you're not buying that place, are you?" He grinned like he expected me to laugh along, like it was some kind of hilarious idea that didn't deserve to be taken seriously. I looked him dead in the face. "Yeah," I said. "I am." And just like that, the room froze. Not metaphorically. Not in that exaggerated way people talk about awkward moments. I mean literally, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody made a sound. It was like someone had hit a pause button on all their carefully constructed lives. The only noise was the hum of the ceiling fan overhead, ticking slightly with every slow rotation, like the damn thing was mocking them with its consistency. Deb blinked. Her face twitched in that way people's faces do when they're trying to rearrange themselves into a smile but can't quite get the math right. "You're kidding," she said, laughing, but the laugh was hollow, broken, like a bell with a crack in it. "You? That place? Eli, come on. That house is—" She didn't finish. Because she realized she didn't know what that house was. She didn't know anything about it. Didn't know the layout or the renovations or the view. She only knew what it represented, that someone she deemed lesser had just done something she couldn't predict and maybe couldn't match. My mother cleared her throat, but even she couldn't muster a defense. "Eli, you didn't say you were looking for a house," she said, not accusatory exactly, but surprised in the way parents get when they realize their kids have whole lives they're not privy to. "No one asked," I said. Simple. Honest. And in that moment, I thought back to all the times they'd laughed, not just tonight, but every other night like it, every other gathering where I was the odd one out. I thought about when I was 28 and got laid off and moved back in with Mom for 3 months, and Deb called me her boomerang nephew, like I was some kind of failed experiment. I thought about the backyard barbecue where Jared got a new car and I got a new job, and guess which one got a toast? I thought about the Christmas where everyone gave each other personalized gifts and I got a $25 Visa card because you're hard to shop for. They didn't just dismiss me, they erased me, one polite shrug at a time. And maybe I could have lived with that. Maybe I would have, if not for tonight. But the silence they gave me now? This new silence? This was different. This wasn't the silence of boredom, or disinterest, or forgetfulness. This was the silence of reckoning. Of realizing that the person you thought you had all figured out just flipped the script without warning. And I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, calm as hell, sipping the same damn water I'd been nursing all night, and let it sink in. Because sometimes you don't need to shout. Sometimes you just need to show up with the receipt. It's funny how people always assume silence means weakness, like if you're not constantly talking or proving or performing, then you must not be doing anything at all, as if value only exists where it can be loudly announced and easily posted. But I learned young that silence is where all the real things grow: pain, ambition, resentment, and the long, bitter patience it takes to outlast people who think they've already won. Because long before that check ever touched Valerie's hand, before that house was even on my radar, I was already building something. Not in square footage or open floor plans, but in grit. And I built it out of shame. My earliest memory of feeling like I was already behind in life happened when I was 8 years old. My dad had just left, one of those exits so quiet it took a few days to realize it was permanent. No screaming, no threats, just an empty closet and the smell of cologne that lingered in the hallway longer than he ever would again. My mom didn't cry, not then. She just cleaned. Scrubbed every countertop like the problem was dirt and not abandonment. She didn't sit me down and explain anything. She didn't need to. The message was loud in its absence. He left, and now we had to make sure no one thought we were broken. So she became sharp. Not cruel exactly, but surgically exact with her expectations. My lunches had to be packed a certain way, my shoes lined up by the door just so, and God help me if I ever forgot to say thank you in public. At home, she called it raising a man. In reality, it felt like boot camp for some war I didn't understand yet. School wasn't much better. I was smart, but not spectacular. I'd get A's, but not awards. I didn't have the flair Jared had when he breezed through presentations or the charm Lindsay wielded like a blade in group projects. I was just there. And just there doesn't get you noticed in a family like ours. It gets you passed over, politely pitted, and eventually labeled as the one with potential, which is family speak for he hasn't failed yet, but give it time. The comparisons started early, and they never stopped. Jared got his first car at 17, a used Lexus his dad co-signed on, while I took the bus and told people it was by choice, because I liked to observe humanity. Lindsay got into a sorority that summer, the kind with letters that meant something to the kind of people who cared about legacies and brunch. Meanwhile, I spent my weekends working double shifts at the bookstore, stacking paperbacks and pretending I didn't hear them joke about how Ellis always got his nose in something. I kept my head down, my expenses low, and I learned to save with a kind of desperation most people never feel unless they've been broke in front of people who are rich and unkind. There were moments, though, when the shame wasn't just private. Like the time I was 23 and brought a date to Thanksgiving. She was funny, kind, working through nursing school, and I actually thought we had something. But Deb cornered her near the punch bowl and said, "He's sweet, but I hope you like paying rent forever," like it was a punchline. That girl left early and never called back. I can't say I blamed her. I remember when Jared closed on his first house, a cookie-cutter box in a gentrifying neighborhood with crown molding and zero personality, and my mother said, "Now that's what success looks like." Not to him. To me. As if she wanted to hold the image up like a mirror and make sure I saw all the things I wasn't. But I was watching. I was always watching. They thought I was aimless, but I was strategic. I never made big purchases, never leased anything flashy, and always paid in cash when I could. I didn't announce job offers on Facebook, didn't flaunt freelance contracts, and never once mentioned the online business I'd quietly started in my early 30s that began turning steady profit just before the pandemic hit. While they were boasting about refinance rates and their second fridges, I was building capital like a fortress, quiet, thick-walled, and impossible to take back once it was mine. Every insult, every eye roll, every backhanded compliment was a brick. Every time they called me a late bloomer, I added another layer. And the shame that should have broken me, that maybe would have broken someone else? I turned it into savings. I weaponized it into discipline. Because I knew one day I wouldn't have to speak for myself. The keys in my hand would do the talking for me. What they never saw, what they could never understand, is that when you grow up ashamed of what you lack, you either get desperate or you get dangerous. And I got dangerous. So yeah, I spent years being the joke, the renter, the drifter, the disappointment. But while they were flashing status like costume jewelry, I was busy collecting something a hell of a lot more valuable than approval. I was collecting time, patience, silence. And now I'm cashing it all in. What nobody ever tells you growing up in a family obsessed with appearances is that the truth almost never survives the polish, and behind every perfect holiday photo or congratulatory Facebook post lies a mess nobody wants to admit they've been living in. The problem with building your life like a showroom is that eventually, someone's going to open a drawer and find the receipts, and when they do, you better pray to God they're not the kind of person who remembers every smug thing you ever said across a table full of charcuterie and judgment. I didn't go looking for their secrets. Hell, I didn't even care enough to snoop. After everything that happened at game night, I figured I'd earned the right to finally disengage, to sit in my new house and listen to the waves without needing to calculate the emotional cost of every interaction. I had no interest in watching them squirm. But life has a way of showing you what's hidden, especially once you stop chasing their approval and start listening to what people aren't saying. The first crack came from Lindsay, surprisingly enough. She texted me a week after the house deal went through, all sugar and emojis, asking if she could pop by and see the new digs. Her tone was too bright, too eager. The kind of forced friendliness that smells like desperation when you've heard enough fake apologies to recognize the tone blindfolded. I told her sure, come on by, and she showed up wearing this tight little smile and designer sunglasses that didn't quite hide the puffiness under her eyes. She walked through my house like it was a museum, complimenting everything with a little too much emphasis, like she was trying to memorize the details for someone else. And then, while sipping a LaCroix she didn't really want, she let it slip. It's just so nice to see someone do this without having to remortgage their whole life. I raised an eyebrow. She laughed, but it was hollow, like she'd dropped a truth by accident and didn't have the energy to pick it back up. Later that night, Curiosity got the better of me, and I searched her address online. The foreclosure notice was public. Filed quietly but there, plain as day. Pre-foreclosure proceedings initiated due to non-payment. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, not because I didn't believe it, but because I didn't know how to feel. This was the same Lindsay who once scoffed when I mentioned renting a place near downtown, the same Lindsay who made a whole Instagram reel about her granite countertops and urban rustic remodel. And now she was months behind on her mortgage, drowning in renovation debt and trying to keep it hidden under throw pillows and pretense. A few days later, I bumped into a friend of Jared's while grabbing coffee, and that conversation spiraled faster than I expected. Apparently, Jared's been crashing at a hotel downtown. Something about a trial separation, which is family code for his wife telling him to pack a bag and not come back until he figures his shit out. The golden boy, the man with the corner office and the golf club membership, was living out of a suitcase and quietly trying to sublet his condo under the radar. I didn't laugh. It didn't feel good, just hollow, like realizing the monster under your bed is just a pile of old shoes. And then there was Deb. Turns out, Deb's second house, the one she always bragged about like it was her retirement plan, had been rented out for the past year. Not as some clever investment, but because she needed the cash to cover a lien on her primary property. That's the kind of thing you don't find out from gossip. That's the kind of thing that shows up in your mailbox when your address becomes public record after closing on a home next door. I received the notification by accident, the envelope meant for Deb's old address, but redirected by a lazy mail clerk. The details were dry, legal, but undeniable. Liens, delinquent taxes, deferred maintenance. She wasn't just living beyond her means, she was praying the facade would hold long enough for nobody to notice. And the wildest part? I hadn't noticed. Not because I didn't care, but because I had spent so many years assuming they were better off, I never bothered to question the version of them they sold to the world. I thought I was the only one wearing a mask, playing a part, hiding my struggle behind silence. Turns out, they were doing the same thing, only louder, shinier, more performative. They built their houses out of borrowed time and brittle pride, and now the storm had come, and they were scrambling for buckets while pretending it was just light rain. I didn't gloat. I didn't wave their shame in their faces. I just stayed quiet, the way I'd always been, but this time, it wasn't because I didn't have anything to say. It was because I didn't need to. Their world was unraveling, thread by thread, and for once, I wasn't the one at the bottom trying to hold it all together. I was outside the theater, watching the curtain fall on a performance I never auditioned for. And damn, the silence had never sounded so honest. It didn't happen with fireworks or some dramatic blowout like you'd see in the movies, no yelling across the dinner table or someone storming out with broken wine glasses in their wake. Just a quiet Sunday afternoon where the last bits of pretense finally started to slip away, and I found myself sitting across from the very people who had spent decades shaping their image of me like I was some sort of cautionary tale they needed to remind themselves what not to become. I didn't plan to say anything that day. I hadn't walked in with some speech in my pocket or some clever one-liner designed to burn bridges or draw applause, but there was something about the stillness in the room. Something about the way Deb kept pretending to scroll through her phone while stealing glances at me like I was a riddle she couldn't solve anymore, that finally made me open my mouth. We were sitting in the living room again, that same room where so many subtle little battles had played out over the years, jokes disguised as compliments, updates shared like trophies, silences filled with the sound of clinking glasses and not much else. I was on the same old chair, the one by the ficus, still a little wobbly, still uncomfortable, but I didn't care anymore because something inside me had shifted so fully that even the cheap cushion couldn't touch it. Deb cleared her throat and said something light, something about how it's nice to see everyone settling into things, and then she made some vague comment about how the neighborhood had really started to diversify. It was her way of dancing around the subject, of pretending not to be dying to ask about the house without letting go of her pride. But this time, I didn't let it slide. I looked up, not smiling, not cold either, just calm, and I said, I didn't buy that house to impress anyone. Everyone turned to look at me, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward so much as it was frozen in place, like none of them were ready for a sentence that didn't come wrapped in sarcasm or defensiveness. I didn't buy it because I wanted you to clap for me, I said, my voice level, my hands resting flat on my knees. And I definitely didn't do it because I wanted to show off or prove something. I bought that house because I wanted one place, just one, where I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Still, no one spoke. I kept going not because I needed to convince them, but because I needed to hear myself say it out loud, maybe for the first time. I spent most of my life feeling like I was playing catch-up in a race I never signed up for. Every conversation felt like a pop quiz on how far behind I was. And I let that get to me for a long time. I let it shape the way I saw myself. But you know what changed? I stopped needing your scoreboard. Deb looked like she was trying to form words, but they never made it past her lips. Jared stared at the coffee table like it might save him. Lindsay blinked hard, swallowing something she wasn't ready to say. And my mom, my own mother, looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like she'd just realized the distance between us was something she'd helped build, brick by brick, over the years. You all made it clear what success looked like to you, I continued. You made it about square footage and job titles and what kind of countertops were in your kitchen. And that's fine. Really, that's your world. But I realized somewhere along the way that I didn't want to live in a house built out of comparisons. I wanted peace. I wanted something real. There was something fragile in the air now, something brittle and fraying at the edges, like the truth had walked into the room and no one knew how to host it. I don't expect anyone to apologize, I said. This isn't about revenge. This isn't even about forgiveness. It's just, I needed you to know that I didn't buy that house out of spite. I bought it so I could finally breathe. The silence that followed was the deepest one yet. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't angry. It was just hollow, like something had been emptied out of the space between us and nobody knew how to fill it back up. The game was over. The performance was over. And in that quiet, I think they realized what they'd lost, not money or status or pride, but something more permanent. They lost the chance to see me for who I really was. They lost the opportunity to believe in me before the papers were signed and the view was mine. They had spent so long defining me by what I wasn't, they never stopped to ask who I could be. And now? Now they were spectators to a life that had moved on without their permission. The first morning in the new house came earlier than I expected, not because the sun was particularly aggressive or the light too sharp through the windows, but because I didn't sleep much the night before. And not out of stress or excitement, but something else entirely, something like arrival. After years of crashing on couches, of quiet apartments with paper-thin walls and neighbors you never speak to, of being the guest who never overstayed but always left too soon, I was finally somewhere that felt like mine. Like no one could take it from me or question whether I'd earned it. And yet, even with the keys on the counter and my name on the deed, it didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt more like an exhale, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath after years of walking through rooms that didn't want me in them. I made coffee the old-fashioned way that morning, no fancy machine or programmable timer, just a kettle and a slow pour, letting the smell fill the kitchen while the horizon outside the window shifted from dark gray to gold. The house was still mostly empty, just a mattress on the floor, a few moving boxes, a single chair on the porch, but that emptiness felt good, felt earned, felt like potential instead of punishment. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, stepped outside barefoot, and sat down on the porch facing the water, the same porch I used to look at from across the hedge while Deb bragged about her beach views and neighborhood clout. The ocean was calm, just barely moving, as if it too was waking up slowly, not ready to stretch or roar or perform. There was a kind of silence in that moment I hadn't known I needed, not just the absence of noise, but the absence of expectation, of judgment. Of that low hum of family tension that never really shuts off when you're around people who only love you conditionally. Here on this porch, with the salt in the air and my hands wrapped around a warm mug, I felt more like myself than I ever had at any holiday dinner or birthday celebration. And then my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen, and of course it was her, Deb, leaving a voicemail, probably too proud to say it directly, too cornered by the truth to let it pass without some attempt to regain the upper hand. I didn't answer. I didn't even listen at first. I just let the notification sit there like an old scar itching under the skin, waiting for me to pick at it. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I hit play. Her voice came through like it always did, confident at first, brittle beneath the surface, trying to wear the same coat of charm that used to fit her perfectly but now sagged in all the wrong places. Hey, Eli. I just wanted to say congratulations, I guess. On the house. It's beautiful, really. Anne, I didn't know. About everything. I didn't know you were, well, that you were doing that well. There was a pause, long enough that I thought she might end it there, but of course she didn't. I'm just saying, maybe next time you could tell someone. It's not like we don't care. It's just, you always kept things so damn close. We didn't know you were planning something like that. You kind of blindsided us, Another pause. Well, anyway, enjoy the view, I guess. And then she hung up. I stared at the screen for a second, thumb hovering over the screen, and then I deleted it. No rage, no pettiness, just a quiet click and it was gone, like it had never happened. Because I knew what that message really was. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't connection. It was damage control. It was her trying to reassert a dynamic that had already shifted beyond her reach. The tide was coming in now, slow and steady, the waves brushing the sand like it was a conversation only the earth and water understood. I sat there and watched it for a long time, the light rising in layers, the clouds stretching thin and pink across the sky, the wind whispering through the slats of the deck like a voice I almost recognized. And I thought about everything that had led to this point, the jabs, the silence, the looks, the dinners I left early, the wins I never shared because I knew they'd be measured and diminished and reshaped into something I didn't recognize. I thought about how many years I spent trying to make them proud, then how many more I spent trying not to care that I never did. But mostly I thought about silence, about how it used to scare me, how it used to feel like punishment, like being left out, locked out, looked over. And now, sitting there with the waves whispering and no voices cutting through the peace, I realized it was the only thing that had ever felt like truth. Funny thing about silence. When you grow up in a house full of yelling, it becomes the only peace you trust.